Welcome to the Run Strong Run podcast, where I amplify inspiring voices from the back of the pack and loudly proclaim all runners count. Without further ado, here's this week's inspiring runner. I'm so excited to introduce you to my friend JoAnn, also known as JoJo. We got to meet in person at the Detroit Free Press Marathon. That is actually one of my favorite races. I say the California International Marathon or Detroit Free Press Marathon are probably one of my two favorite races. But JoAnn, you're going to want to listen closely to her story because she recently celebrated her 50th birthday and she said, I want to run a marathon for my 50th birthday. So going from non-runner to 5K, 10K, half marathon, and then boom, full marathon, and she's not done yet. So here is JoAnn. Welcome, JoAnn, to the podcast.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we met on Instagram before the Detroit Free Press Marathon, and then we got to meet in person in the starting corrals at the Detroit Free Press Marathon. Take us back there to that moment, lining up for your first marathon. How are you feeling?
I was feeling nervous, to be honest. I had friends who were running the half, so it wasn't as, I guess, nerve-wracking, but like talking to you on Instagram helped me. Like, because you were like, oh, I'm, doing the 6-hour pacing and just meet up with me and just look for me in the corral. And so I'm like, I kept telling my friends, okay, I got to find Stephanie because she's going to help get me through this. I never ran with a pacer before. I was always like, paying attention to my watch or, like just trying to keep up with certain people and never really appreciated the work that pacers do because like you don't have to think because you guys do all the thinking. It's like you're just running and enjoying it. So yeah, it was a little nerve-wracking. I mean, obviously I was nervous because it was my first one. And I think I felt that way with my first half as well, right? Like you're just kind of, you get those butterflies and nervous, but like once you do it, you're like, oh my gosh, I accomplished that. That was amazing. Let me do it again.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's actually rewind further because I know a little bit about your story. We were just talking. You are local there to the Detroit, Michigan area. So you were not a runner like really prior to 2017. I mean, go ahead. You tell us your story. What got you to the marathon?
So in like the fall of 2016, I started doing a workout that's local to the Detroit area. It's called Cyfish Training. If you guys want to, look it up, cyfishtraining.com. It is a full body workout where you use your own body weight or a flat plate weight. And you do everything from pushing the plate, pulling the plate, dragging the plate with your feet, with your hands, you're crawling. I mean, it is a really good workout. So I started doing that, met some people through there. One of the ladies there, her and I used to always work out together. And she's like, oh, you should run a 5K. And I was like, yeah, I don't run. And she was like, no, but this one's around Comerica Park. Like it starts at the front of Comerica Park and then you run around. And then after you run around Comerica Park, like you get to, or around the city, I should say, just like you get to walk on the field of Comerica Park. And then I'm like, well, I love baseball. So, okay, I'll go ahead and sign up for that 5K. And then got there and the atmosphere was nothing what I expected. I mean, I guess I don't know what I expected, but like people were cheering each other on and it was awesome. And I also beat her. So then I was like, oh, I want to do another race. So then that was like April of 2017. And so then I just started doing 5Ks probably once or twice a month, like any local. I wasn't really like running in between because I was still doing the other workout. But I was like running a race probably every other weekend, like a 5K. So, and then I got into 10Ks and then a half marathon. Because another girlfriend was like, you could totally run the Detroit Free Press half marathon. And I was like, I don't know. And she's like, yeah, you can. And it's so cool because you run over the bridge into Canada, back through the tunnel. She's like, it's an awesome race. And she wasn't lying because it is an awesome race.
So in 2018, you ran the Detroit Free Press half marathon because yes, what's really cool about the Detroit Free Press races is they have the international half marathon that starts with the international full marathon. And so, yes, both those races go over the Ambassador Bridge into Windsor, Canada. And then we spend about what, 3-ish miles in Canada. And then we return back into the United States under the Detroit River. I'm wearing a sweatshirt, Underwater Mile, that the Detroit Free Press Marathon is known for, that you, JoAnn, so graciously and wonderfully sent to me. So thank you. That was such a surprise.
Oh, you're welcome.
Um, but yeah, so you show up, you run the half marathon in 2018, and talking about atmosphere, was that atmosphere of the Detroit Free Press half marathon 2018 different than that first 5K or those other smaller
Oh my
races
gosh.
you experienced?
Yes, like running the half marathon, there were so many more people that just like come out and cheer you on. Like the signs are funny, to read. Like I love the power up signs where you run by and touch them to power up, right? Um, just people out there cheering for obviously people they know, but then cheering for people that they don't know because they in some way, shape, or form, know that it's either something they might want to do, like the crowd, maybe they want to do it, maybe they have done it, maybe they're thinking we're all crazy, because I do think we all are some way, shape, or form to be out there, putting our bodies through that. But yeah, so I'm running the race, and I signed up with 2 other girlfriends. And my goal, I have a little competitiveness in me, or I did at the time, and of course I wanted to beat them, but I also wanted to finish in like 2.5 hours. And that saying, like, what can go wrong will go wrong type of thing. And like, you should prepare for it. Well,
Mhm.
I didn't fuel at all for the marathon. Like I never, while training, didn't try anything. I'm like, oh, I can just run it. I did, get, like the Gatorade and water on course, but I didn't use any of the gels or anything like that. And I was going up the bridge. So I'm going up the bridge, on the bridge over into Canada. And I at the time was using the Runkeeper app, like for my, times and whatnot. And I heard my app go activity pause. And I'm like, nope, still actively running. So from the time I was on the bridge till I finished, I had no idea what my pace was. Like, and I was just running, and I ended up finishing it in like 2 hours, 30 minutes, and like 30 seconds.
Wow. So like really, I mean, you hit your goal even with not knowing your pace and with not fueling.
And with that, yeah. And so I've learned since to fuel during during long runs, but like I said, I was just kind of, I would say I was still new to running, even though I was running like 5Ks and 10Ks. It wasn't anything like somebody wasn't necessarily coaching me. And my friends who were running weren't like, oh, you have to fuel anything past, an hour or an hour and a half or whatever. So I've definitely learned that, like, fuel.
What is your go-to fuel now that you are into fueling?
My go-to right now is UCAN. To me, it's like soft on my stomach, it doesn't upset it.
Mm.
And then I've been using the Scratch, like the carb drink. So anything that's, over an hour for me, anything over an hour for me, that's what I use. So, and I
Yeah.
also use Noon to like hydrate as well. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, when people always ask me like, "Hey, what fuel do you recommend?" I'm like, you kind of have to give it a try and like know what works best for you and your body and your preferences. Like I used to use gels in the past, but now I'm not like the texture just kills me. So I tend to prefer chews rather than gels. And so, but yeah. Um, okay, so you finished the Detroit Free Press half marathon, learned you need to fuel, learned that maybe you needed a GPS watch and not rely on the Runkeeper app.
Right, exactly.
And
And a
so,
new phone. I got a new phone too because my phone was almost dead by the time I was done. But yes.
yeah, all these things you learn when you start like running 2+ hours, right?
Right, right, exactly.
So then at that race, the Detroit Free Press Half Marathon, were you like, because I love to hear that you say that you're a competitive person because I'm a competitive person too. So I love that you secretly were trying to beat your friends. Did you beat your friends at
Oh
that
yeah,
race?
yeah, yeah. And it's funny because the couple years after that we ran together. Well, the next year, a girlfriend talked her sister into running, and she beat us both. But then the next year, well, I think it was because that was 2020 was our virtual year, and then in 2021 it was just around Detroit. We couldn't go into Canada, and I ended up beating both of them because of my girlfriend's sister had to use the bathroom. She's like, "You wouldn't have beat me if I didn't have to use the bathroom." I'm like, "Well, then you shouldn't have taken the gel that you never knew that you never took before that was not good on your stomach. Not my problem. I still beat you." So it's just funny because I always tell them like long distances I'm better at than short distances. So but yeah, so after I got done with the race in 2020 and just the crowd and the excitement and everything, I was like, I want to do a marathon. And my girlfriends were like, no, we don't want to do a marathon. You're on your own. And I'm like, that's okay. I'm like, I want to do a marathon. I just want to say, that I've done one. But I also didn't necessarily want to train for one because they're a lot more time consuming than a half marathon is.
Yes, they are. Those long runs of marathon training, it takes up a lot of time. Like one day of every weekend. I mean, for me at least, the weekend is when I do my long run. Like one day, it's going to be consumed by that long run training run. So you said, "Hey, I want to do a marathon," and then your first marathon was in Detroit in 2022. But really, it was that 2018 showing up there for a Detroit Free Press Half Marathon. Wasn't it really like that point that you're like, "I want to do the full marathon"?
Yeah, like probably once I came out of the tunnel and like that crowd again, right? Like the fresh air in the crowd, I was like, okay, I want to do a full marathon. So, I mean, just the crowd, like that's what makes it worth it. I would say, like, for people who are, thinking, do I want to do one? Do I not? Like, the training can suck. Like, I mean, sometimes you can find a group to run with. Sometimes I just like running by myself, just like for thoughts and clearing your head and all that kind of stuff. But like if you can just focus on when you do the actual run and in the race, yeah, there might be spots where you don't have like crowd support depending on what race you're doing. But I mean, for sure at the finish and at the end, you're going to have that crowd support. So it's definitely worth it.
Yes, absolutely. But I so agree with you that there's something just so energetic about the Detroit Free Press Marathon and Half Marathon that is now getting me so excited to come back for year three in Detroit. I mean, I travel from California to Detroit, and I say that it's one of my favorite marathons that I pace next to the California National Marathon. But because yeah, just the energy and the people and the spectators. I love that the half marathoners stick with the full marathoners until I can't remember exactly what mileage. Like maybe
I
mile.
think I think this year was mile 11. Like the first year that I ran it, so in 2018 and in 2019, you ran the full distance. Like the half marathon would finish and would go to the right, and the full marathon would keep going to the left. So
Oh.
like we ran the whole thing together until we were done, and then they kept going. And then after COVID, they kind of had to reroute things a little bit. So yeah, and then I think they decided that too, because the start and finish were at the same place on Fort Street, and now we finish in Campus Martius. So I think with them kind of reworking things, um, I mean I have enjoyed the half and the full. So except for probably mile 22 to 25, I didn't really like.
I don't think you're going to find many races or many marathoners that say that they like those miles.
Cause like, I mean, and the crowd control was, or not control, like crowd support was a little bit, less on those miles because they're further out. So, I did have a friend, I think, come to mile like 21. So I was like, okay, all right, you're there. I can see you, and then keep going. But, and I also stopped, well, I think we got separated around mile 13 or 14 because I stopped to use the bathroom, which took me a minute. And then everybody who came to cheer me on, I stopped, took a selfie, like, because I wanted to, take it all in because I wasn't really worried about a time except to finish in the allotted time, which I did. So,
And so that's an important point to to point out is that for the Detroit Free Press Marathon, the cutoff time or the allotted time stated is 6.5 hours. Is that correct?
that's correct. Yep.
Yes. So On Pace Race is the one who currently paces the Detroit Free Press Marathon. That's why I go there every year to pace with On Pace Race. And so I'm the 6 hour pacer, and then they have a sweeper behind me. So the sweeper is really the kind of the one that holds that 6:30 pace. And so yeah, so you and I met in the starting corrals, and we ran together. We did the 90-second run, 90-second walk intervals. The run interval about 12:40 a mile, the walk interval about 15 minutes per mile. I can't remember, Jojo, if you ever said to me, you walk fast, but that's often what people say to me is, you walk fast.
You do walk fast, but that's okay. You're on pace. You got to keep us, keep us going. Keep on making sure everybody finishes in the allotted time that they're supposed to finish.
Yeah.
That's why yeah.
No, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say that's why this year I'm like, could I do it? Could I do back-to-back marathons? Maybe I could.
Okay,
So.
yeah, because you and I were talking, and I'm like, Jojo, I want to see you again in Detroit, but I feel like we're kind of jumping around here. But you have another marathon coming up, the Chicago Marathon, which happens to be the week before Detroit Marathon in 2024. So you got into Chicago. You ran the Detroit Free Press Marathon in 2023, and maybe before that you were kind of like, okay, I just want to run one marathon and say like one and done. But you loved it so much that you're like, I'm going to see if I can get in for Chicago. And boom, you got in for Chicago. And now look at you. You're even contemplating, maybe I can do Detroit the next week and do back-to-back marathons.
Yeah. I know. Crazy, right? Crazy. I think too, like I said, the crowd and just like seeing how you can push your body like to another limit, right? Because you're already uncomfortable. So just seeing how you can push your body. Yeah. I was fortunate that I threw my name and credit card information into the lottery and was drawn. So I don't so we'll see what happens. I figure I'll just kind of see how training goes through the summer. And I am running the Indy Mini in May, so the half marathon in May. And I think Detroit, because of the international, because we do go over into Canada, right? They have to kind of do a background check. So I want to say the beginning of September is like the cutoff for the international half and the full, but they do have a US only half that I think you can register up to the day before.
Yeah, but part of what makes the Detroit races so awesome is that part of going over the Ambassador Bridge into Canada, like that international part.
Yeah, and like if it's a good weather day and the sun's coming up, like you can see the sunrise while you're on the bridge, and all those fast people miss it because they're too fast.
See, that's why you need to stick with the 6 hour group, the run walk, the party in the back.
Yeah.
Fun people.
Exactly. And you meet, like, I don't know, in running you meet so many people. In when I was running the full, and most of the time, probably like mile 18 on, I was kind of like I'd hit and miss with people. So I was alone a lot, but people were out there cheering. But at one point, you run out to the Indian village and then you turn around and come back. So as you're going out, people are coming back the other way. And it just amazes me. The shape size does not matter. Like, what matters is how much training you put into it. Because I came across two guys in Indian Village, like laying on someone's grass. And I'm like, we're at like mile 22. What are you doing? You've gone 22 miles. You have 4 miles left. Like, get up and walk if you have to, but finish the race. And one of the guys ended up beating me. And I don't know like how old he was, but another guy, like he and I were kind of talking, and his name was Andrew. Couldn't tell you his last name, but he was from Canada, and he was like, I wanted to run a marathon. He was like young 20s. And I'm thinking, here's this kid in his young 20s struggling, and here I am 50. So like, it doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter, none of that matters. That's all thrown out the window for a marathon. It's like how much training you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. So
I agree with you 100%. I mean, a runner does not have one body type. Runners come in all shapes and sizes, and absolutely, like I think the young people, like that young 20-some-year-old kid that you're talking about, I think they look at the marathon, they're like, ah, I can do that, no problem. And they'll often show up, and a marathon can eat you up and spit you out. I mean, it is very a challenge. And I think that's what you just said a moment ago too, is like, that's what you've learned about running. And that's kind of like what the marathon has taught you, is that it's fun to push our body to new extremes that we never thought were possible. And so just that challenge aspect. And so how did that feel for you, Jojo, crossing that first full 26.2 marathon finish line?
it felt great. Well, what was funny is one of my girlfriends was at mile 25, and I'm like, you're not going to see me finish. She's like, no, I'll meet you like at the end of the finish line. So, right, I won't see you cross, but I'll see you after. And then I had friends who ran the half, and they were at like mile 26, like right when you turn the corner before you turn the other corner to finish. And I'm like, you guys, and they're like, no, keep going. Like, we've seen you here. Like, so it was an amazing feat, and knowing that I had fun doing it and I finished it within the 6.5 hours, like, to me, that's an accomplishment. I mean, even if you finish even if you finish before the sweeper, I mean, and even if you finish after the sweeper, it's still an accomplishment, because like, you went out there, you took the step to, you know, step out of your box or out of your comfort zone to try something, and I mean, like I said, the crowd support will get you through. And, I made my kids come down and cheer me on too. So that always helps. I was like, I sat through so many sporting events for you guys. So you can come give a couple of your hours on a Sunday to come cheer me on and watch me run a marathon. But they did miss me finish, which is a whole nother, I'm sure they were talking. But we did see each other after the finish, so they're good. And they saw me at mile 15. So
I love that. So you talked a little bit about pacing, like using a pacer, and you've never used, is that correct? You've never used a pacer until you ran with me in
yeah,
Detroit? And I loved how you were talking about how it's nice to run with the pacer because you don't have to look at your watch. Like that's what my job is to closely
yeah,
monitor the watch to make sure we're on pace. I'm using my pace band. I'm calling out our time at each mile marker, telling us how much of a cushion we have at each mile marker, how we're doing with our pace. But how was that when you stopped at the bathroom about the halfway point, mile 13? And then coming out and seeing us up ahead. I know I kept turning around and like yelling for you and
I
like, come
know.
on, you can do it. But talk us
So,
through like that part.
okay, so after that, I don't know. Well, I shouldn't say I don't know what happened to me, but then I saw my kids and my friends at like mile 15, and it never occurred to me until later than to keep that same 90 seconds running, 90 seconds walking. I don't know if I just kind of felt like defeated for a minute, well, more than a minute. And I was just like, then I did have to stop at the medical tent before the DeQuinder cut area because I was getting some chafing. So I'm like, I got to take care of that or it's going to get bad. Yeah, I mean, the marathon is just as much mental as it is physical, if not more mental than physical. Because I think in my mind, I'm like, oh, maybe I would have been able to finish 10 minutes faster if instead of feeling defeated at some point, I stuck with the 90-90, and because I would like run and then stop, and then not necessarily stop, but like slow down. And instead of for 90 seconds, it might have been for 4 minutes or something, because I was not paying attention at all.
Right.
And it wasn't until after the marathon that a girlfriend was like, "Oh, did you stick with the 90-90?" And I was like, "Until you just said something right now, I didn't." Once I got out of the bathroom and once I was like, "Oh, they're way up there," it didn't even cross my mind again. So it was nice to do the first half with you and have, I mean, I wanted to do the whole thing, but nature calls and all that stuff. So anyway, but yeah, for you guys to just think about it and for us to not have to think about it.
That's nice
So
as a runner. Yeah. I mean, my half marathon PR is thanks to a pacer. So even pacers use pacers when we're racing. So yeah, I definitely believe I know the power of pacers, but I also understand that is incredibly difficult. 'Cause I've been there too, where I've been with a pace group and I stop and use the bathroom, and then it's difficult to catch up with that pace group. And you're so right with what you say about how a marathon is more mental than physical. I often hear that it's described as 80% mental and 20% physical, because it's so hard to pull yourself out of that feeling of defeat. And I think like almost I would say maybe it might be safe to say that every runner at some point of a marathon is going to kind of have that feeling, or that feeling of self-doubt. So when runners are in my pace group and they say that they do need the bathroom, what I'll often say is run. If you see a porta potty up ahead, like pick up the pace a little bit, run ahead to the porta potty, do your thing. And then when you come out, we should be like right there, maybe just a little bit ahead. And it might be easier to catch back up to us. I know that you actually, it was your very first marathon and you got to hold my pacing sign.
I know, because you had to use the bathroom.
And so that's also a question that people ask. They're like, if I'm pacing by myself and I don't have a co-pacer, they're like, well, how do you use the bathroom? And that's exactly it. I look around at my pace group and I'm like, okay, who's been with me for a while? Who's holding that steady pace? And my eyes drew right to you, Joe. And I was like, okay, you want to hold my pacing stick? You're in charge of the pace group. So how did that feel?
That was amazing, because I was like, so then I was telling everybody, the people at our group, I'm like, okay, take my picture and I need a little video, because I'm holding the pace sign. So, but I did try to run ahead a little bit, but I don't think I ran obviously far enough ahead. And like I still had gloves on, and it was just like, it's something that you don't think of, I think, too much is using the bathroom when you have to, when you run a marathon. Like, I mean, a half isn't bad, because usually you can wait. I mean, some can't, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like the back of the pack, because that's exactly what we're doing here on the podcast, is highlighting the stories in the back of the pack, the inspiring stories, like your story of you wanted to run a full marathon at 50 and boom, you made it happen, and now you're unstoppable and considering doing back-to-back marathons. But I think that's the thing. It's like we're out there on the course for 6 hours. That's almost a full working day. Like that's almost like if you're working a 6-hour day, you're expecting like a break or two, or like possibly a lunch break. And so I think that's the part, and that's the piece that I've heard, like even the elite runners look at the back of the pack and say, wow, that's pretty darn incredible to be on your feet moving forward for 6+ hours.
Yeah, my daughter-in-law's father has run marathons, and so she came to cheer me on, and he was just like, I don't think you understand, like 6 hours is a long time to be out there, moving forward. And I mean, okay, in reference, you could drive from Detroit to Chicago, past Chicago, in that amount of time, right? So like when you think about, oh, okay, 6 hours, but I don't know, it's still like, it's just a great feeling of accomplishment to know that I've run a marathon, because not everybody can say it.
Absolutely. I mean, they say too, 1% of the world's population has run a marathon, or maybe less than 1%. So Jojo, congratulations. You're in that 1%.
Thanks.
So we talked about what's next. You have Chicago. I hope if you're not running the Detroit Free Press Marathon, you're at least out there with maybe doing the half marathon or on the sidelines. And I can't wait to see you again in Detroit. Have you thought about marathons beyond Chicago?
Not yet. No. Well, I did tell you we were messaging on Instagram and I was like, I should come out and, do Seattle or do the California marathon, but Chicago's going to cost me a pretty penny. So that's going to have to, maybe be for 2025. We'll see. We'll see how things go.
Well, if I continue to be injury free and healthy, there's no stopping me. So I plan to run the California International Marathon. And I think it's safe to say the Detroit Free Press Marathon every year, because that's just seriously my top two like favorite marathons, just in so many different aspects. And so I know that we'll see each other somewhere, somewhere.
Well, you'll definitely see me, and even if I'm not running the marathon, I will make it a point to come down. You won't be that far. We'll, hang out in Detroit for a little bit. But yeah, I wish more people knew how awesome the Detroit Marathon was. Like, I think it's very underrated in how awesome it is.
Well, I hope that people will share this podcast episode, and then they can hear us rave about the Detroit Free Press Marathon, and then join us in 2024, 2025. Yeah, because I absolutely agree with you that it's an amazing marathon. So, what advice, JoJo? Let's end on this. There's someone listening, there's someone watching. They would love to run a marathon some point. Perhaps they are turning 50 here soon. And they're like, oh man, am I too old to run a marathon? What advice would you give to them?
Just do it. Like Nike says. I mean, if any part of you at all wants to run a marathon, just run a marathon. Like, I mean, the training is the part that is the hardest. And it's, getting through that. But I even, because a few girlfriends that I tried to talk into running a marathon, they're like, I will run a half. I'm not going to run a full. I will run a half with you as often as you want to run a half. I have no desire to run a full. If you have a little bit of a desire to run a full, just do it. Just do it. Just go for it. And don't stop until you reach your goal, because I feel like if I can do it, anybody can do it.
I love that so much. And it's so true. Yes. Well, thank you so much for hopping on here, sharing your inspiring story. It's good to see you virtually and talk face to face. I hope that through telling your story, people are inspired to just show up and do it. And I hope that 6-hour group at the Detroit Free Press Marathon gets even bigger, with people running their first marathon, or maybe it's your 200th plus marathon, wherever you might be. Hope to see you out there. And JoJo, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Run Strong Run podcast. You can reach out to me on Instagram at Run Strong Run, or through my website at runstrongrun.com. You can support this podcast through a rating, review, or share. Until next time, run strong and run happy.